A second type of fill stitch is the satin stitch. Satin fills are well suited to narrow borders and small shapes so that the length of each satin stitch can form across the width of the border. There are usually no needle penetrations across the object, so these stitches create a glossy effect. To change an object into satin, select the object and then click on Satin Fill. A satin fill can be used on objects that are consistent in width, such as this bar, or those of varying width. The software automatically changes the stitch density so that in the narrow parts of the object, the density is lessened compared to the wider areas of the object where the density is higher. If I open Object Properties, by selecting the object, you can change the spacing of a satin stitch. Notice that there are two different types of satin fill, satin and satin special. For this size of object, the satin stitch is too wide to jump from one side of the object to the other and stitch out successfully. So you can select this type of object and apply the satin special to that shape. The long stitches are broken into shorter ones. The software distributes the needle penetrations in a random pattern so the object will still appear glossy. Raised satin creates multiple layers of satin stitching. Raised satin can be applied either with the icon or by selecting Raised Satin in Object Properties. With raised satin, each layer of the satin stitch gets progressively wider. Once again, this type of stitch is most suited for narrow objects or small shapes. You can change the spacing of raised satin as well as the number of layers. The number of layers is the number of layers between the underlay that is laid down as a base and the outside cover stitch. So this satin dot actually has 5 layers: the underlay, the 3 raised satin layers, and then the cover satin. The raised satin stitch can be used to add the look of pad stitching to your embroidery and can also be applied to lettering.